So let's get the ball rolling. I'm just going to get the panel members just to briefly introduce themselves, and maybe I'll just start with you first, Em.
Yeah, awesome. Hey everyone, my name's Em. I am part of Uni Hill Church in Bundoora, so that's my church context. Involved in youth ministry there and in leading a young adult small group. So sort of working lots with young people, and I've been involved in youth ministry prior to being involved at Uni Hill as well. Outside church, I'm working in the legal industry and about to finish up a law degree, working as a paralegal. So very exciting sort of and liminal times for me in that respect too, I suppose, finishing up study and stepping into full-time work. So that's a bit about me.
Fantastic. Thanks, Em. Talisha.
I am Talisha and I'm married to Jordan. I am a beauty therapist, so I have actually just hit 6 months off work at the moment, not able to work currently, but desperately excited to be going back in just over 3 weeks. I'm a missions kid. I grew up Baptist and then met Geordie, moved from Queensland, moved to Melbourne, now in a Apostolic Pentecostal church at Uni Hill as well. Family's still scattered across, well, at the moment in Australia and in the US, but parents still missionaries, and have a lot of respect for church family because they're often some of my closest family, at least down here. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Talisha. You can go up next, Geordie.
Well, I am Geordie. I'm Talisha's husband. My church context is I'm the former youth pastor of Uni Hill Church, current operations pastor of Uni Hill Church, which is a fancy way of saying the everything pastor, kind of, who needs to get done. I'm the dude that it ends up on my desk and we get it done. And pretty much my context is that. Just love Jesus and get it done. Run a small group, a few other bits and pieces, but pretty much finger in many pies at church.
Awesome. Thanks, Geordie. And Annie.
Hey guys, my name is Annie. I am part of Uni Hill Church, so I currently work leading and hosting the team. I'm involved in the leading team as well, leading the team. I've previously been involved in youth ministry and leading on those lines. I've connected before in the past as well. I currently work for a delivery company, or a delivery partner, I run our training, insights and performance for a division that service regional and remote Australia with mainly telco type stuff. So if you live in the sticks or in the middle of nowhere, good chances are we'll be installing you with something. So it's been quite interesting because it's obviously liminal times at the moment. So try doing insights and performance during that season. It's a bit tricky. I love God and I love people, and I love having combos like this. So
cool. Thanks, Annie. Now the sound was a little bit variable there, so I'm not sure if it came clear towards the end. So maybe we'll, I don't know if you've got headphones or anything.
I can go grab them.
Yeah, it's okay. We can do a little bit of a test if you want.
Now,
yeah, it's pretty good now.
Yeah.
Is that coming through for everyone else?
Cool.
Yep. Thanks, Andy. Fantastic. So what I'm going to do, we've been 6 months now with COVID, or probably over 6 months. Just maybe what's the thing that's maybe helped you most? It might just be a particular activity, just has helped you get through. Maybe we'll just start back with you, Em.
Probably getting outdoors. I think I kind of decided to shift my routine a bit more to incorporate outdoor exercise rather than indoor early on. I think, getting the thumbs up from Geordie, I think that was really helpful just in terms of like a space to clear the head, move my body instead of just sitting down. And I find that a good way to sort of connect with God as well, being in the outdoors. So it's a really, really basic thing, but I found that immensely helpful.
Good stuff. How about you, Talisha?
I've kind of had to do the whole trial and error, having not much to keep my days busy, at least towards the beginning of COVID. But I definitely have found, similar to Em, time outdoors has given me different appreciation for nature and just stillness. And I suppose that's probably the only thing you can do when everything's so dead quiet all the time. You're forced to stop and slow down. But I had a big conviction at the beginning of COVID to really crank up quiet time, and I think that's been a huge part of my life that was lacking previous to COVID. So I think that's been a huge strength to draw upon recently as well. And something, being an extrovert, I struggle with a lack of social interaction. So trying to just be diligent and intentive with having conversations with people, trying to call 3-5 people a week just to stay connected has been helpful for my spirits as well, because you get that encouragement from others as well and get to build them up.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Geordie?
Yeah, a little bit like Em said as well. Hard to believe, but I've enjoyed walking around outdoors around the lake in Mernda or whatnot. I mean, getting in touch with my inner sensitive side. But probably remaining structured has actually been one of the biggest things that's helped me get through COVID, not getting out of the rhythm. So staying in the rhythms that I would normally be in. Like down to little things like even getting out my clothes the night before I get up. I've just always done that. Like, call me a bit of a weird dude, but it's one less decision you have to make the next day, which is then more brain space to make other decisions. So yeah, trying to stay as structured as I can when whatever plans we make seem to fall through pretty easy at the moment.
That sounds good, mate. Sounds good. And how about you, Annie?
Yeah, so for me, really, I guess, looking after the simple things in life, because a lot of other things have been stripped away. So I've been working from home since March. So like the others, getting out for walks. My weekly grocery trip has been integral to my sanity. I love looking forward to going to the shops once a week, or more so if I'm getting a bit too stir crazy and walks just aren't cutting it. But yeah, just looking forward to the little things and just really valuing the simple things, just to get a lot more enjoyment than what I would if I had a different perception of it.
That's great. Thank you. So let's get into liminality. So I'm going to just get the thing started. Any of you can chime in and just respond and just bounce off each other as we have this conversation. But what I was keen to do tonight is get a bunch of young leaders on the lounge, because liminality is not something that's just for us old guys or old people. It's, I believe, affects everybody, teenagers, kids, all of us. And what I'm really keen to hear is from your perspective as young people, because I know you're involved in different areas of leadership in the life of the church. But in liminality affects us whether we're involved in the church or not. It affects everybody. And so maybe just, I don't know, just your take on liminality as you've seen, as you've understood it, and as you've maybe have to process it. Just give us a little vignette or a little snapshot on maybe what it means to you. And anyone can go first.
Don't all look to me at once, so I guess I'm going first by all those looks on there. Liminality, as sort of it's been described on some of these other calls, is the space between, and I think that is a context that's open to everyone, regardless of what position you hold in a church, but as followers of Jesus and beyond that as well. We all go through liminality. I think giving it a name and knowing that it's okay and we all go through it as well at the same time is pretty important. I think no matter what your age is, you're sort of, in my liminal experiences, you can feel like you're the only person that's ever walked past this before, but knowing that there's others that go through this sort of in-between space as well is not a bad thing. Like, it's just really a reality of life, I guess, at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's good. That's very good. And I think, I found great comfort in knowing that, just being able to name it, being able to talk to others about it. I think when I was a younger Christian, I used to struggle a bit, because you think, okay, what are people going to think if I start to sort of fess up to a bit of stuff? How they're going to see it. But as you get a bit older, or probably didn't take me too long, because I got to the point, there's other people that I actually engage with that were really happy to be honest, and that was so helpful, to try to not be fake, try and be real. So yeah, so certainly, being able to share with others is so important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sort of piggybacking off what you said there, George, I think liminality is a reality for everyone, whether we have faith in Jesus or not. I think it's something that everyone can relate to. And as we've sort of said, the label, I think, is really helpful in actually being able to name that kind of, it can be quite an awful space. I think it's made much more difficult when we don't have Jesus in that space with us. But it's quite a tense space and it can be uncomfortable. So being able to name it is really helpful. And I think my snapshot from a faith perspective, I think I've sort of come to realize that liminal spaces are really where God wants us to be. And I think he places us in them quite consistently. And I sort of, if I look back on my years, I can sort of identify clear marker points and consistent times where I have been in that space. And I think if you then zoom out as well, I think the life of a Jesus follower is inherently liminal in the sense that we're here on earth and the kingdom of God is here on earth, but it's also not yet here. It's now and it's not yet. In that through what Jesus has done, we're able to sort of experience tastes of the kingdom of God, experience salvation through faith in Jesus, but at the same time, we're not going to see the fullness of the kingdom until we're with Jesus. So that in itself is a bit of a liminal tension and a space to be in. And I think then that can manifest in different stages of our lives personally as well.
That's good. And, other participants, feel free to put your questions in the chat if you feel like to do that. We'd really welcome that. Okay. Anyone else there? There's still a few more of you there.
Yeah, just to add to the points, guys. 100% agree with what Geordie and Em kind of brought to the table with the combo. But I think for me as well, like liminal seasons are really exposing seasons, and they are 100% part of life. And I believe that God can move really and does move really powerfully in liminal seasons, and any transitional season is a growth season in my perspective. So there's so much that we can learn from being in liminal seasons, and often it increases our capacity for the next season to come. And I loved what you said, Em. 100% agree. God's always placing us in liminal spaces because, he doesn't want us, I don't believe that his heart for us is to remain the same, but to grow into more maturity and expand our capacity as people and to share his love further on this earth. So, yeah.
That's good. Definitely does increase our capacity. I think that's, I think when I started to realize that it's through that hard stuff that we grow, as much as I never wanted to go through it, it just changes your whole perspective on things. Yeah. So I've got just a comment here from Tim. Do you think that Christians as such should only help, encourage and teach from prior experiences and pains? So you can just check that out, guys, and you can respond to that one.
Look, I'll weigh into that as well, because myself and Timmy have had many, many convos in time gone by, which is great. And look, and this is just my personal opinion, and I think it's important to delineate that. I've always been a believer as you preach from where you sit. So in terms of what that is, you don't teach something you've never walked through. So how can I sort of help teach someone that I haven't personally walked through as well, which is not always personal experience, but in life I think there are, as was noted by everyone there are liminal situations we go through on the other side of it, and there is a lesson that's learned, which you then teach from your life experience to drive and help someone through that same liminal experience. But if you hadn't yet yourself walked through it, you're teaching almost an abstract idea. I think is sort of something that's worth noting as well. You have to sort of be conscious that it's sort of like the analogy I'd sort of use, and this is a pretty terrible analogy, but hey, it's 7:30 on a Sunday night, so don't expect the good stuff this late at night. But would you really get someone to help you on the car that's never opened a bonnet before? And it's like sort of, or would you rather go to someone that's had the same car trouble you've had before, fixed it themselves and got out the other side and their car's working? That's not a call for perfection, because I think God does equip us at different seasons, but I think it is important, especially as context to young leaders, to remember that as well. And that's sort of where I went wrong sometimes in my earlier years, was I was sort of teaching things I had not yet walked through, learning leadership principles that were abstract in a book, but totally different when you find yourself in those leadership situations. So that would be my ramblings. Everyone else weigh in.
I totally agree with that. I think, you got to preach from where you sit, but also on the other side of that, is being somebody who is looking for help or advice from someone is one perspective, but from the other side of that, being someone who not to sound obnoxious, but we're all in different areas of influence, or whether it's a small group or leadership in church or youth group or whatever that might be, being aware of who we're leading as well and knowing our limitations is super important. As Geordie said, leading people through something that you've never gone through can sometimes be, you're kind of more of an encourager at that point, because I guess there's not a whole lot you can do except assure them that it's all going to be okay, or that I'm sure it's all going to be all right. But sometimes people need a bit more than that. And when you've walked through something yourself, you can give a bit more of, I guess, a sincere understanding of, you know what, it's going to be tough. It's probably going to be really crappy sometimes, but know that you have people who have gone through it with you. See the people who've come out the other side. Don't lose hope. And so I think being people who have influence in helping people through that, we need to be very wise in how we handle those situations, and in many times also refer to someone else when you know that it's beyond what you are capable of explaining or articulating, or even if you just feel like you can't do it as well as someone else can, not from an insecure perspective, but if you know that you're outside of your limitations, then get external help and say, look, I think it'd be really great if you spoke to this person, or just be clear of those topics that you're not 100% sure of. I would be terrified to try and dive into something I don't fully understand or know, out of fear of leading somebody astray, or not I guess sharing what God actually had for them, because I've been so prideful in thinking I had the answers to something that I haven't actually walked through.
Yeah, some good comments there. Look, I feel, yeah, look, for sure, like, if I know my own experience, when someone has related to something I've been going through, I listen to them, because there's a connection, there's that credibility, and you can tell, when you can tell someone's feeling the pain you felt, there's an automatic connection. But sometimes I found them, and Tim, it's a great question, mate, because I've sometimes felt I haven't had some experiences that other people I've connected with have had. And the thing that I've probably learned, I probably should have learned it faster, is just don't try and bluff your way through. Best thing to do is listen, hear their story. Don't try to come out with all the answers, because I really just don't have them. I mean, I know it's Jesus, but sometimes I just found just listening is the best thing I can do, because I want to learn from that person. I want to learn from what they've gone through, or try to understand. And again, I think you touched on this too, Talisha. It's, if it's not you, it's not you. Maybe putting someone in contact with someone that's better able to maybe minister to that person. So,
and it's not to discount, Holy Spirit does lead us in those situations too.
Yeah.
Ourselves out of our depths, or not entirely sure what to say or how to comfort somebody, but I think that's where I think relationship as well with Holy Spirit comes into it, because he can sometimes just put a verse on our hearts, or just give us that wisdom in knowing words aren't needed right now, your presence is, or whatever that might look like. But yeah, that's probably my only little strategic.
Anyone else on that question?
Yeah, just on the back of all of that, I think I agree that I guess for me, I sort of see a distinction between some of those words there, Tim, in terms of helping and encouraging, and then teaching. I know I don't tend to appreciate when people stand on a platform and purport to teach on something that they don't know anything about. It's not particularly helpful, and it can sort of send not good vibes, if I can put it that way. But I suppose I have the view that anyone can encourage, no matter whether you've walked through something or not. Anyone can comfort and be a friend, and anyone can help, as long as we're sort of approaching that idea of helping from a standpoint of listening and then doing what is actually helpful for the person, rather than thinking that we're helping, but really we're just teaching or giving advice that's sort of uninformed or not actually needed at the time. So I think, yeah, it's important to be conscious of your limitations and to draw on people around us. But I think we've always got a role to play, even where it's something that's new for us or that we haven't experienced. And I think that's a real way that I know I've learned a lot from sort of observing people having their own experiences, and whether that's watching from the sidelines or walking alongside them as they're experiencing that. There's sort of a mutual blessing that can happen there by me supporting and encouraging them, and me learning from their experience and seeing what God's doing there as well.
Good.
Yeah, definitely. I agree, guys. I think that as a leader, it's really important to stay humble. And, if you hold humility well, you'll have no problem reaching out for help if you come across a situation that is way beyond you. I think that there's no harm, and we're meant to do this journey together. And I think you get into really dangerous territory when in your leadership or influence that you're in, that you think you have all the answers, especially when you haven't been through stuff. So yeah, I definitely agree with the comments that you guys are making. And yeah, like I love what you said with the, you can always encourage people and help people. And there's all sorts of different types of stuff that you can do. If someone's going through a situation you personally haven't been through before, it doesn't mean that you, hands off, can't do anything.
Yeah.
I think it's really important as well, like, to go to God, like ask for his advice. Like he's a good father. Like he's a God of the details. So, often situations we can come up with our plan, or I'm going to talk to this person or whatever. But I think it's really important just to be like, hey God, so I have no idea, or I've somewhat been through this, and I what do you think I should do with this situation? And get his advice and feedback, and then take it to others that you trust in your world and get their feedback. And it's really important that we act as a community, in communion with God, but then with others as well.
That's good. Just everyone else in the chat, feel free to pop, or everyone else, sorry, in the call, feel free to pop any comments or other questions you have, even around this question from Tim. I want to encourage you to do that. Something I just want to mention too is I know sometimes we don't have the same experiences. My family or our family, we've had the experience of having a family member with quite a profound disability, and we could always relate well to others that had that experience with a family member. Automatic connection mostly, and but we also, I know personally, I didn't want people to feel they had to not talk to us and direct us to the person, whether it's church or outside the church, that had that experience. So really, I think for me, I just wanted someone to listen, not to solve the situation, but just to listen. That was very encouraging as well. But so I do feel there's that combination of someone listening, but then there are those people that have walked a similar path. You need to have those people around you, that people that can be great mentors, just peers, colleagues, just a friend. And I think it's important to have that. And I guess just learning how to hold that space with someone when you haven't got a similar experience. I'm sure, and maybe you might want to talk about this. I don't know if something will come up, but I'm sure we've had experiences where people have come up and given well-meaning advice that hasn't been so well-meaning. There hasn't been, I think, Annie, you mentioned humility, and it's just like they really don't know what they're talking about, and they, might even arrogantly say, just pray, have already prayed, have already read scripture, I know all that stuff. It's like, this isn't helping. Like, do you know what I mean? That kind of an experience can often be quite painful. So, yeah, I don't know if you've got any thoughts around that, guys.
Yeah, that's a real good point, Aresti, to make as well. Sometimes the best thing we could do as followers of Jesus, so regardless of being leaders or anything like this, is I think in any context, is just to listen. People have so much to say, but sometimes they need someone to listen to. There's so many other voices out there, especially in like a millennial context. Like, let's be brutally honest. It's well documented. I'm not a huge fan of social media and all that, and that's fine. That's my conviction. That's no one else. But the reason is there's so many voices out there. How do you discern what the good voice is? But what has happened is people, I feel, have I'm referring to my generation here as well, we've lost the ability just to listen. Sometimes some of the most profound things you'll hear is just when you stop talking and actually just listen to what someone has to say. And we all know the well-meaning people at our churches, and this is not just like Uni Hill Church, this is any church. And they're usually older ladies, let's be honest, and now I'll get a little controversial here. And they mean well, but then they tell you that because you have tattoos, you let demons into you and stuff like that. And you thought there's actually a story behind these tattoos if you just stop for a second, and I can tell you that. But they're trying to, inverted commas, help you. And I think that is a trap as believers, and it's definitely sort of in my younger experiences was, especially as preachers, I think it's a thing. You can sometimes like the sound of your own voice, to use a lack of term, but the most things I've ever learned is not when I'm talking, it's but when I'm actually listening to what those around me, but having the right voices, not just one point of view, but multiple points of view, I think is important.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
I think for me, Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
go. No, go, Annie, go.
I just, you know, throughout my life, I've gone through some pretty significant situations with grief and, you know, all sorts of heavy stuff. And yeah, I can definitely relate to when people just give unwarranted advice and experiencing the other end of liminal phases, especially with the heavy stuff. 100%. Like a lot of the time, you just want someone to listen. And a lot of the time that we assume where someone's at and go into fix-it mode for a path that they were never even on or looking at or focusing on. And I think that we need to just, when we listen, that's when we can find out and actually observe where they're really at. And then that's where true influence happens and where you can encourage and go to that deeper level with someone in a liminal season, even if you haven't quite gone through what they have.
Yeah, that's good stuff. You'll be able to see this next question from Nicola up on the chat. I'll just read it out. How do you think leaders in a church, where it's to a broader church congregation or individuals, how do you think leaders in church go in being vulnerable by sharing their liminal experiences? So do you think there's a stigma around being perceived as not really trusting in God by talking about times where you may question God's plan? Therefore, there may be a lack of this type of conversation in the church. So
super long, sorry guys. And
it's all good. It's a great question.
It's a very good question.
Great.
So vulnerability in sharing their liminal experiences. Is there a stigma around being perceived, not really trusting God through that vulnerability? And the whole thing about this type of conversation in church, you guys can read it, you get the gist of it. Yeah, chime in there.
I'll go first if that's okay with everyone else. I definitely think that this is just church in general, or at least as I've experienced it growing up. We do a good job at talking about God's faithfulness when we come out of something, while brushing over all the things we had to go through to get to that faithfulness of God. And I know that even personally, it's hard to share on those things. It's easy to say things like, there's this time in my life where I was really struggling, but when I put my faith in God, I came out the other side. But I'm definitely one who sits there and goes, yeah, but what did you go through? How do I relate to you right now? Like, was it just something small and petty that makes my small and petty things feel like, oh, okay, maybe this isn't just me? Or is it something that's really quite significant and can contribute to, I guess, other people's experiences and speak into that a little bit better? So I know that for me, I try to be an open book. If somebody asks something, I try to be open to, I guess, answering those questions in full, and sometimes too in detail if that is what they're needing to better understand a hard time as the loss of a loved one and how I felt through that, or how I went when, I had these great plans and then God just threw them out the window and it was something different altogether. But I think there's definitely room for improvement, I suppose, in any platform context, as I've experienced it anyway, to kind of be more vulnerable in that, to quote a Hillsong song, in the crushing and in the pressing, and in that refinement and that time where we are really put under pressure, and when push comes to shove, our faith wavers, or we just doubt for a moment how good God is. And I think that that's just part of being human. But probably unnecessarily so. I think we probably do feel a bit of shame, or like, oh, I'm speaking to someone, I won't be a good Christian if I tell them how in doubt I was back then, especially when it's recent or as you're going through it. It's hard for us to share, and for me to share with our Connect group if I've had a hard time now because I've been a Christian for X amount of years now, I should have this sorted. That we have a struggle around sharing those times where we don't always have it figured out of, I think, a fear of stereotype of not being a good Christian, or, yeah, she's a faithful Christian, but she's not constant, or, you worry about that, which I think is for all of us just human nature. We don't like to go back into admitting shame or admitting sin, and that's not always a big thing. Sometimes it is, whether it be, I don't know, about addictions or whatever it might be, or something just as constant doubt, or just bad relationships that aren't speaking life, or things that you are wrestling with constantly but aren't actually finding the right tools to move through to get to the other side. But hopefully that answered the question.
I think it's an interesting topic.
Yeah, I'm sure there's many different perspectives around that, but that's how I've experienced it.
I think we'll say as millennials, like, Nicola, I think we're getting better at it than like you only have to take a quick trip back through church history a couple of generations to see that there was almost this, and this is in the broader Western church context, like I can't speak obviously in the outside of that because that's my experience, but there was the pastor was perfect,
Yeah.
which was not the case because we're all human as we know, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think that shift now, once again, as a millennial connected generation, we all know what's kind of going on with each other a lot more and a lot quicker. And I think there's still huge amounts of room for improvement, but I think there is also a more keeping it real with one another that like, hey, these are all existential thoughts we have as well. These are struggles we have in the grander context of it. And I think that's where growth, I truly believe it's where growth happens when we're willing to be vulnerable with each other. Like no one wants to facade. Our sort of the millennial generation, we're probably the best at that. We sort of, no, you can't get away with the mask anymore, as you all know. Like you look how many people are discredited quickly. So within the Christian context, it's like, hey, we either need to be completely open or they're going to see what's going on anyway. And that's not a bad thing because we're all championing each other on. I think when we share these experiences. Do we get it perfect? Nah. As Christians, I think, is exactly as Talisha said, I think sometimes we can even hide in a Sunday church context. That's only an hour and a half out of your total week we're seeing. And you can present to them whatever you want, and as well as your sort of the Instagram, Facebook feed, that is often not the reality. Yeah. But that's what you can present. But for us as millennials, the challenge is to go say, hey, let's embrace life with one another, and life is messy.
It is genuinely a hunger for more authenticity and genuineness coming through, I think, in church from people who are on platform, preachers and all sorts are becoming very open about starting to anyway. But I think that in general, in a small group context, we get a much better engagement when we kind of stay on people's level and we don't hide behind I've been a Christian for this long now, but people really appreciate when you can get into the nitty-gritty and open up with them about things that you maybe struggle with, because more often than not, others are going through the same thing. And that's what they need to help them grow and move through things with people that love them and trust them. They can trust and keep them in a safe environment. So I think genuineness and authenticity is definitely something I found our generation really hungers for in church context.
So let's come off that then. And that's fantastic. Genuineness, authenticity. If there's that real design, that's as I understand it too with millennials. And with Nick, you might be Gen Z.
Yeah, I think technically.
You're a Zoomer. That's amazing stuff. But then the flip side of that is social media, which is the veneer. It's hiding behind, the social media platform. So there's two quite opposite things. So how do we create these vulnerable spaces? I mean, we have the platform, there's preaching. That does one thing as far as it goes. So what do you, maybe think of it from your own perspective, what would you like to see? Maybe from your own experience, maybe from your understanding from conversations with young people, young adults, high school youth, wherever it might sit. What do you think are some ways forward that could really begin to help? Definitely vulnerability, no facade, that kind of stuff. But practically, how can we begin to do that?
I'm usually one to say that the platform is the last answer, because to me it's the least important of all of the ways that we engage and connect in church. But I think in this respect, the platform is one of the most important areas. I think one of my biggest frustrations as a young person and as a person who influences and leads young people is when I see sort of what can appear to be inauthenticity or a lack of willingness to be vulnerable from the platform. And the reason that bugs me is because for some people, that's where it starts and ends. They'll come into a church service or they'll watch an online service at the moment and they see what's on the platform. And I agree with what I think it was you, Geordie, that said, I think our generation just has an ability to sniff out fake news or fake people, and we don't like it. And so if that's what we sniff out, then people can associate that with church, Jesus, God, all of those things become intertwined, and then no thanks, I'm not interested. So I think that leading by example from the platform in terms of how we speak and share is key. And then I think that the way we then grow that is in sort of one-on-one and smaller group relationships and in the way that we do discipleship, I think it's so important that we model vulnerability, that we're willing to be vulnerable with safe people for us so that we're able to grow, and that we model vulnerability to the people that we're leading so that they learn and they see that that's a really healthy thing. And I think I've seen and I've worked with people who are leading me that have been vulnerable and that haven't, and I've been in leadership spaces where I have been vulnerable and where I haven't. And I think the times when I haven't wanted to be vulnerable is, I think in the past I've had a perception that vulnerability will undermine my leadership and my credibility, and that I'll lose the respect of the people that I lead. And I think it's still a journey, absolutely. I've got heaps of space to go in this regard, but I think I really believe now that vulnerability actually strengthens your leadership, and it strengthens the respect that people you're leading have for you. And it gives credibility to what you're saying because they can see that you're a human and that you struggle with stuff. So I think whether you're sort of having one-on-one relationships and friendships with people, leading groups of people, whatever it looks like, I think we've got to model it to those people, and then we've got to demonstrate it in our safe circles as well for the benefit of ourselves, so that we can grow and so that we get better at and more comfortable being vulnerable and real.
It's good.
Okay. You got any thoughts there, Annie?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, like in anyone, I think in any space or scope, you need to be the change you seek is a phrase that I often tell myself. Be the change you seek. So whatever you want the world to look like, you need to first start walking in that. And I think being genuine as a human in any relationship or context. And I think to redefine what we see as the platform, I think that we all have platforms in our lives that we carry influence in. We all possess influence. It's how we use that influence and to what depth that influence has. So, you know, whether you're in a formal role or a position in a church, or if you're just at school studying or at uni, or just, you know, I mean, we all carry influence in our worlds. And I think that, you know, how you choose to be genuine and be vulnerable in those areas of influence is where it really matters. I think to build that accountability I just think that be the change you seek. So whatever you want the world to look like, you need to first start walking in that. And you can't lead people where you haven't been before either. You can't ask of people what you're not doing in your world.
Yeah, no, that's great, Annie. We've covered some great stuff here, guys. I think that various things you've shared, I think that opening question from Tim as well, and yours as well, Nicola, that, you know, people's past experience and vulnerability, these things really really help us understand, okay, how can we be God's agents to bless others, to come alongside others, and also to learn from others, even through their stories, and we've got our own as well. So just have a bit of a think about this next question. We'll go through this, and I'm going to come back to this other question that's come up on the chat, but just how do you think young people, you know, youth, high school youth, young adults, how do you think they respond to this idea of liminality? Do you think they're open to sharing their liminal experiences, to being vulnerable, or, you know, is it going to take a lot more trust? What's been your experience in your, you know, the life of the church, you know? And for those of you, it's not always about what goes on in the building. You know, there's other encounters we have, interaction with people. What could you tell a guy like me that's over 50 on this is what it's like when you're looking at this particular generation, Rusty?
I think it does tie into the questions Timmy's posed for the next one as well. It takes time to build a safe space, a liminal space is what I would say. So within the context of like our Connect group, and this is, I've had a couple of young adults Connect group now as well, but it didn't just happen overnight. It was actually doing life with one another, this concept of we're not compartmentalizing life. Like I often use the analogy of the Marvel movies, and I'm not a huge Marvel movie fan. I'm not a hater, just not about it. They're all the same. But what I love about it is the Marvel Cinematic Universe is one universe. And that's our life. And I think sort of, especially when I was sort of coming through like late 20s, nearly early 30s now, it was you had your church friends and then you had your real friends.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, no, a safe space is actually, there is one universe, there is one world, and you have to create a space, but that takes time for people to trust one another, because we all come in, and what I noticed, with our own preconceived notions and our own hang-ups before we've even walked into the room. And we have to acknowledge that as Christians, not everyone's sort of at, and even as humans, not everyone's at the same point, because someone's life experience has led them to where they are. They're going to totally perceive you a totally different way. And so to create that safe space, it comes from that real relational doing life on life. So in the context of the first Connect group, which was years ago, and you were a part of that one as well, Annie, when it was like back in Diamond Creek, we had just under 30 people that some of them would never step foot in a church, but they would come to this Connect group because they felt like they were safe. And then we replicated that again over in sort of Mernda when you were there as well, Em. And it was, we had people that once again had no real interest in the Sunday context or the platform or anything like that, but they loved the people that they were doing life with, and that then led to being able to do life on life. But I think everything ultimately comes back down to a relationship, and with our millennial generation, and authenticity. If the authenticity is not there, you're gone. And it's not like the old days where you could preach a sermon on a Sunday and no one could fact check you. Like, I always giggle about the Pentecostal stories where there was 600 people in the room, but it turns out there was 100. Those days are gone. Like, you can't get away with, what's the term I'm looking for here, those sort of exaggerations, because they want authenticity. And when you create that safe space, a relationship actually becomes more beautiful when you're open with one another. Like in some of those Connect group spaces, and sort of Annie would remember them back in Dymo, there were hard things that were shared in that circle of people, but they were willing to share that with one another. And there are high highs as well. Like in the new Connect group, found out someone was having a baby before nearly anyone else, which was incredible that they felt they could share that with us. So, but it's that, it comes down to, you have to create a deliberate safe space is what I notice. And if us as a leaders, once again, let's on this panel, if we're not willing to be vulnerable and create a safe space ourselves, don't expect it to happen, because it won't.
I think one of the big things that is just kind of putting more words to what Geordie just said, I think all of those things in terms of helping young adults, our generation, connect into a space where they feel safe to be vulnerable and whatnot, I think that's hugely determined by culture and what culture we allow into those spaces. And culture is usually, it is all encompassing of all of your values. So what you value will show through and set the culture for that group. So if you are valuing things like authenticity and vulnerability and safety and love and deep relationships, and obviously God is one of those things too, I think it takes time sometimes, depending on, when culture is established, or if you try to change something, or if you get to start with a clean slate, or even just one-on-one relationships, we can also set tones and cultures with how we allow others to feel in our presence as well. And I think that, to kind of touch on your question, Aresti, and on Timmy's question as well, I think in creating a space where they can be vulnerable starts with us. And I know Em and Annie spoken to that just before as well. We can't ask people to do or go where we haven't been or are willing to go. And I think that's a big part of doing life with people. As Geordie said, I think it's so I guess all-encompassing or well-rounded holistic with all of those things, that it's not just one thing that will, I guess, just change a space or just set that tone. It's intentional and it's deliberate. And I think that culture really sets the tone for all of that as well.
No, that's good. No, definitely intentionality, being deliberate. The culture piece is so important, and you're right, it won't just be one thing that's just going to flick the switch and it's all happening. But look, you can have a look at, you'll be able to see Tim's just question up there on the chat. Tim, if you like, you don't have to, mate. But if you want to unmute yourself, if you're up for it, and just it's a great question here. And if you want to add anything else to it, or we can just go with what you've typed. So I'll just give you a few moments if you want to say something.
Yeah. Connect groups and Bible studies, it was just that. There was no relationships. It was just going, reading the Bible, and then see you later, see you next week type of thing. especially with young people today, do we actually miss the relational thing? Because I know growing up in the church, I missed that. You know, there was no relationship. It was just a front on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And possibly a bit of learning on a weeknight, but that was about it. There was no doing life together. And like Geordie said, there was your friends at church, which you never talk to outside of church, and then your proper friends outside of church. So do you think that we're missing the relational? You know, we're going through the thing at the moment, going through Acts and how the early church was, and it was all relational. Are we really missing that relational being part of the church?
Yeah, no, there's some great stuff there, mate. So I'll throw that back to the panel. And anyone else on this call, those of you that have been listening in, you feel free to contribute. You can unmute yourselves and make some comments as well. And as you consider doing that, I'm also seeing, Tim, you've written that other bit there as well about youth and youth and adults, the whole idea of just having fun and enjoyable nights every week. You know, there's a place for fun and enjoyment together, but I think what I'm hearing you say there as well is sometimes that can gloss over the reality of life and the pain that we sometimes push down, and there's no opportunity for that real honesty and that safe space where we can do life together. That can certainly, definitely be give the perception, hey, it's all good, everything's great, let's just have some fun together, guys. And maybe 50%, 70% of that group are just, they've got all these issues going on. And creating that space, that doing life together, accountability. So connect groups, definitely a great place for it. Culture has to be shaped. Anyone want to just respond to that? Maybe share a story or echo confirmation or anything? I think some good things have been said in this conversation tonight.
Yeah, I think we tend to get the balance wrong, to put it in a blunt way, in terms of between fun and just having a good time, but deeper relationships and connection and vulnerability in that sense. And I talk about balance because my view is that both of those aspects are really important. And I think that it's important to start from a place of building shared experience and having fun together, whether this is in a sort of a one young person you're trying to connect with if you're in a youth ministry, or if you're leading a small group, or if you're just hanging out with a bunch of friends and you want to connect on a deeper level. I think it's a little naive perhaps when we attempt to just make that happen and say, hey guys, why don't you all share everything you're struggling with and let's talk about it. And I'm like, well, I don't know you and I don't know if you care about me. Why would I do that? Whereas if you kind of cycle it back a bit and you have some common shared experiences and you're able to have fun together and you've connected and you can sort of connect with particular people in a group or in that setting, I think that builds a really strong foundation to then step into, I guess, more in the middle of that kind of spectrum towards having some of that accountability space and safe space for conversations. I think particularly in youth and young adults ministry in a church context, I think sometimes we fail to take that second step and we can just stay in the comfortable zone of having fun and having really sick events and heaps of people come along. And you can even extend that to, it's not just fun, but maybe all we do is worship services and we have amazing times of worship and preaching, but everyone leaves and they feel disconnected and no one has any friends in that group. And I don't think that's the right balance either. And it kind of links back to the question that you put before around young people and liminal experiences. And I think sometimes in church, there's an assumption that young people don't want to engage and have those conversations. And that is the first thing. If an older person asked me, what's one thing you want to say on behalf of your generation? It would be, we actually want to talk about stuff and we want you to listen and we care about, your view and what you think on it. And we want you to listen and care for us. And that's been especially my experience with sort of young people in the high school bracket is, if you read a book about young people, it'll tell you that, we're the most emotionally driven and feelings driven generation to have ever existed. And sometimes that might cause young people to turn away from liminal experiences and retreat from God because they're sort of caught in their feelings and they can't see God or hear him amidst it. But then other types of people, that really leads them to want to express and process those feelings and talk about it and make sense of it. And I don't think that the church as a whole does a particularly great job of creating spaces for that. And it potentially comes back to some of that stuff we were saying before around vulnerability, is that how do you create those spaces without having leaders lead into that and create those spaces, and it's just a bit of a cycle when no one's willing to be vulnerable. And I think one of the biggest consequences is that young people are left without a voice and without a safe space to process what's going on for them. And I think that's why a lot of young people walk away from God and from the church as well.
Oh, no, thanks, and that's some great things there. Nicola, you're finishing up year 12. Did you want to add anything? Just hearing some of the things that Em's has shared. I mean, is some of that true around young people, high schoolers?
Yeah, I think so. I think even like the first thought that popped into my mind, without sounding like too much of a cynic, I think there's also a presumption that maybe young people haven't really had liminal experiences, or like nothing that's comparable to someone of like your age, Dad. Like, I don't know. I feel like there can be some fun ageism in there, which is not really helpful. But I don't know. I guess we're all growing and we're all learning. But yeah, I think there's even like, besides liminal experiences, just like trying to, in terms of just like connection and stuff like that, like I think there's just this presumption that church isn't really meant to be cross age. Like, even we have the set boxes of like kids church, youth, young adults, over 50s, and we're all kind of like confined to that. And like, Tim, what you were saying about how in the book of Acts it talks about like church was relational. I imagine that to be, it's not just like you're friends with the people in your age bracket. It was just a lot more, I don't know what the word is, like fluid,
Family, cross-generational.
cross-generational, that kind of thing. Yeah, that's my 2 cents worth.
Okay, that's cool. Annie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. Can't be quick. Yeah, I love what you said, Nick, and I think to your question as well, Tim, I think that I could 100% agree. Like, I think that too often we are too quick to just take a template from the past and keep going, and we forget to ask God what he wants to do in this season, what looks more like how God wants it to look. And I think in this liminal season in COVID, we have been forced away from all templates, forced to rethink things, not from an element of judgment or, but from an element of love and opportunity to grow into something totally new, and to expand further than what we have before. And I think that, this generation that's coming up, I really strongly believe, and I think it's been said a couple of times tonight from Talisha and Em and Geordie, but I think that there is a strong desire for depth. And I think that in the past, the younger generations have been thought to not have or carry that depth or want that depth. And it's shown in our, I think we've all been part of a youth service that hasn't had much depth, or, whatever context you're in. But I think that there is a genuine need and desire stirring in this generation of millennials, especially within liminal seasons, for depth and for genuineness and for real life and realness. And it's kind of contrasted by the social media life where everyone just shows their highlight reels. And that's something that, we probably don't have time to talk to tonight, but, there's this, opposites kind of flowing together in this kind of world that we're living in the moment, especially with the millennials, that, the social media contrast between this desire underneath the surface stuff for real, genuine relationships and life and depth. And like, I know for myself, I always desire depth, and I want to talk about things. And I think that in the past, we've lacked genuine, deep conversations. And I can't stand surface conversations. I'm like, when can we go deeper? But I think to what the other guys have said as well, it's really important to build relationships right. And you can't just go deep with someone that you haven't built that chemistry with and that love bond, or, they call it the love bank, if that all makes sense. So that's just, some thoughts from me.
No, that's great stuff. Look, it's really been encouraging tonight. I'm just hearing all these different things and around liminality, but how, particularly, I guess, in the context of young people, young leaders, high schoolers, young adults, millennials, because irrespective of age, we go through these things. And I think those qualities, depth, vulnerability, genuineness. I mean, you've all used different language, but it's, you know, same thing. Being real, you know, setting culture, and you know, it's not just it's not something we can package up and here it is, just do it. It's a real process. So I really appreciate what you've all shared. Thanks so much, Annie, Talisha, Jordan, Em. Thanks, Tim, for your questions and your contribution, and Nicola, thank you too for those questions and your contributions. And I've got another one here from Esther. So we need to understand you all as growing spiritual beings, expect you to have input. I'd love to help us help you. Did you want to share? Did you want to unmute yourself, Esther, and add anything? We're happy just to leave it at that.
Right.
That's a wonderful comment. Look, I know Esther. Esther, here we go. That's fine. All good. So yeah, Esther's a little bit more senior like me. We're a bit longer in the tooth, so that's a beautiful thing there. I think that's my heart too. We you know, want to go across generations and come alongside, learn from one another, and grow together. And you know, we can have our youth groups and have young adults for sure, but the sense of coming together across generations and learning and growing is just a powerful part of what the kingdom is all about. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for your contributions. Take care. We'll be on again next week, next Sunday night at 7:30 with the same Zoom link. Love you all to join us again. And yeah, have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Yeah.
guys.
Bye.
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 See ya.